The ranch was quiet that morning, the sky streaked pink and gold, the air still cool before the heat of day would press down on the land. John saddled his horse, preparing to ride into Abilene, yet his eyes kept straying to Clara. She moved with quiet purpose, sweeping the floor, tidying the table, as if the cabin already belonged to her. He told himself it was temporary. She was here for one night, perhaps two, and then she'd be gone. That was safer. That was easier. But safety and ease were not what fate had given him. When the horse was ready, John turned to her. "You're set to ride." Clara smoothed her dress and clutched her carpetbag. "Yes." Her voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes, a dread she couldn't hide. John knew what awaited her in town. Suspicious glances, cruel whispers, the hard life of a woman alone. For a moment he considered telling her to stay, yet the words caught in his throat. He wasn't a man who offered promises lightly. They rode in silence, the trail winding through the open plains. Wind tugged at Clara's hair, and dust rose in soft clouds behind them. Halfway to town, the sound of distant hoofbeats drew John's attention. He turned sharply in his saddle, narrowing his eyes against the glare. 3 riders crested a hill, their figures dark against the sky. John slowed. The men didn't look like cowhands. Their clothes were rough, guns slung low on their hips, and the way they angled toward the trail spoke of ill intent. Clara followed his gaze, her fingers tightening around the reins. "Trouble?" she asked. "Could be," John muttered. "Stay close." The riders drew near, grinning with the kind of confidence that came from lives spent taking what wasn't theirs. The leader, a broad man with a scar down his cheek, called out, "Mornin', Cartwright." "Who's the lady?" John's grip tightened on his reins. "Not your concern." The scarred man chuckled. "Everything out here's my concern. New face like hers, wouldn't want her getting lost." His eyes lingered on Clara in a way that made John's blood burn. "Keep ridin'," John said flatly. The men exchanged glances, their smirks widening. One spat into the dust. "We'll see you around, Cartwright." With a laugh, they spurred their horses, galloping past and disappearing into the horizon. Clara exhaled shakily. "They knew your name." "Rustlers," John said grimly. "They've been sniffing around. Don't worry, they won't try anything in town." But even as he said it, unease gnawed at him. In Abilene, the stares were worse than he'd imagined. The general store went silent when Clara stepped through the door. Women eyed her with suspicion, men with interest, none of it kind. Clara stood tall, but her grip on the carpetbag trembled. When Mrs. Whitcomb at the counter asked, "Is she your wife, Cartwright?" John felt every gaze in the room press down on him. "No," he said evenly. "But she's under my protection." The words echoed louder than he intended. Clara's cheeks flushed, and Mrs. Whitcomb's lips thinned, but no one dared say more. John bought supplies, then guided Clara outside. She walked quietly beside him, her steps small and quick. On the ride back, she finally whispered, "You didn't have to say that." "Yes, I did," he replied. The trail stretched before them, wide and lonely. John found himself glancing at her more often than he meant to, noting the way the sun caught her hair, the strength hidden beneath her quiet demeanor. Something stirred in him that he hadn't felt in years, not just a duty to protect, but a longing he'd nearly forgotten. Back at the ranch, Clara carried the supplies inside, humming softly as she worked. The sound filled the cabin in a way silence never had. John watched from the doorway, realizing with a start that he didn't want her to leave. That night, a storm rolled over the plains. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the earth, and rain battered the cabin roof. John checked the shutters while Clara lit an extra lamp. The storm's fury made the walls tremble, yet inside, a different tension grew. Clara stood by the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames, her voice quiet. "Thank you for today," she said. "For what?" "For standing by me, for giving me shelter when no one else would." She hesitated, then added, "I don't want to be a burden, John. If you want me gone tomorrow, I'll go." He stepped closer, the storm raging around them. "You're no burden," he said, the words rough but true. "This place has been empty too long." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the lonely rancher and the abandoned bride understood something neither had dared admit aloud. They needed each other more than either had known. Outside, the storm roared, but inside the cabin, Something new was taking root, fragile, uncertain, but alive. The storm lasted through the night, rattling the shutters and flooding the dry gullies around the ranch. By morning, the air smelled of wet earth and prairie grass, the sky washed clean and bright. Clara stepped outside with a bucket in her hand, her dress damp at the hem, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled, soft, fleeting, but real. John watched her from the porch. That smile struck him harder than any bullet could. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, pretending to check the cattle, but inside, something restless stirred. Days turned into weeks. Clara stayed, first on the excuse of helping with chores, then simply because leaving no longer seemed possible. She cooked meals, mended shirts, tended the small patch of garden, and even learned to milk the cows. At night, she read aloud from an old Bible she carried in her carpetbag, her voice filling the cabin with a warmth John hadn't felt in years. The townsfolk still whispered when John rode in with her, but whispers couldn't touch the bond quietly forming between them. Yet the shadow of those rustlers hung over him. He kept his rifle loaded by the door, his eyes always scanning the horizon. Clara noticed, though she said nothing. One evening, as the sun bled into the plains, John saddled his horse. "I'll ride the fences," he told her. "I'll come," Clara said firmly. "You don't have to. I want to." They rode side by side, the prairie wide and endless around them. At the far pasture, they found tracks, fresh hoofprints, too many to be strays. John dismounted, crouched low, and touched the churned earth. His jaw tightened. "They've been here," he muttered. Clara's face paled. "The men from the trail." "Yeah." He straightened, scanning the hills. "They'll try something. Question is when." That night neither of them slept much. The dogs barked restlessly, the cattle stirred, and the wind carried the sense of danger close at hand. John sat by the window with his rifle across his knees, while Clara dozed in the chair beside him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. He didn't move, afraid to break the fragile peace of that moment, even as the threat loomed outside. The attack came 2 nights later. Hoofs thundered across the yard, voices shouted in the dark, and then the crack of gunfire shattered the silence. John was on his feet instantly, firing from the doorway. Clara grabbed the pistol he'd left for her and took her place at the window. Bullets tore through wood, shattering glass, splinters flying. The rustlers whooped and cursed, circling like wolves. One tried to break into the barn, but Clara's shot rang out, grazing his arm and sending him stumbling back. John fought with the fury of a man defending not just his land but his very soul. Lightning flashed, illuminating the chaos. Men on horseback, rain whipping sideways, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle. He dropped one rustler, then another, until the survivors turned tail, fleeing into the storm. When it was over, John staggered back inside, bleeding from a graze on his shoulder. Clara rushed to him, pressing cloth against the wound, her hands trembling. "You could have been killed," she whispered. He looked into her eyes, fierce and unwavering even through tears. "So could you, but you stood your ground." Their faces were close, the storm still raging outside, and for the first time, John let the walls around his heart fall. He leaned down, brushing his lips against hers, a kiss rough and desperate, yet full of all the things he hadn't been able to say. From that night on, Clara was no longer a guest. She was his partner, sharing the work, the risks, and the hope that had been long absent from his life. The town soon heard of how the lonely rancher and the abandoned bride had defended their home together. Respect replaced whispers, though John cared little for the town's opinion. What mattered was the light in Clara's eyes, the sound of her laughter in the cabin, the sense that after years of solitude, he was no longer alone. As autumn settled over the plains, painting the land in gold, John took from a box an old silver band that had once belonged to his mother. He held it out to Clara one evening on the porch, his voice steady but soft. "I never thought I'd give this to anyone," he said. "But I want you to have it. Not because you had nowhere else to go, but because you've made this place a home again. Because I can't imagine my life without you." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, John, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in years, the lonely rancher smiled. A smile full of promise, born not from solitude, but from love found where neither had expected it. And though she had once whispered, "I have nowhere else to go," Clara Jameson Cartwright knew she had, at last, found where she belonged.